I could feel very high.
We open to a boy painting a model spaceship and doing a frankly terrible job. Unthinned paint straight from the pot, no masking on the cockpit glass, grip halfway up the brush, failing to brace his hand for a more steady application, complete bloody amateur. Not to worry though, as we're only here for some background story, the kid in question talking about his dad making a real spaceship. It won't be ready for years, says the dad, something the kid puts down to those pesky Vulcans holding we eager humans back. The dad tries to convince him they have their reasons, though doesn't sound like he believes it himself. Bugger all of that though, as it's now 30 years later, and a ship has crash-landed in some crops. A Klingon lad is scarpering from the ship, and the pair of aliens with mottled skin who are chasing him while pooping a bit of yellow as well. The Klingon lad makes it into a silo with a particularly unsecure door, while a human, presumably the owner of the field, pops out of his house with a space shotgun. The pair of mottled skin aliens reach the silo, and one of them squeezes their way under the particularly unsecure door by smooshing their body before letting the other in. This apparently was what the Klingon was hoping for. He jumps from an upper door, then poops green at the silo, the resulting kaboom utterly destroying it. All of which obviously doesn't impress the owner, who first warns the Klingon to drop his weapon, then just shoots the bastard. Up we go to Earth's orbit, and a tiny conical pod is looking over a much larger docked ship. It's occupied by people we'll come to know as Captain Jonathan Archer and Commander Charles Tucker III, but their sightseeing is cut short by a summons from Starfleet Medical. The shot Klingon is there, you see, and everybody wants to know what the bloody hell's going on. Everybody includes more new faces, and some of them have been adopted by patrons of the channel, so let's say hello to them. Admiral Maxwell Forrest will be known to us as Admiral Forrest Kelly, by order of our own Admiral Mark Sharp. And Ambassador Saval here will be henceforth called Detective Sykes from Alien Nation, adopted by Captain Pixune, who's technically an admiral, but only allowed to wear captain's pips after that whole business on Risa, least said, soonest mended. Detective Sykes from Alien Nation is telling them he plans to return the Klingon and isn't particularly forthcoming on any more information. Admiral Forrest Kelly thinks that's unreasonable, not least of which because it happened on our bloody planet. Archer arrives and is given an update on what we know so far, namely that a farmer shot a Klingon who we've been told was a courier. Detective Sykes is of the opinion that the only reason the Klingons haven't already bombed our entire planet back to the Stone Age is because of his diplomatic intervention and offer to return the corpse. I mean, okay, the guy's not technically dead yet, but Detective Sykes thinks things would be a whole lot easier if he were. He also thinks we shouldn't launch our special new ship while things are awkward, an attitude it would seem Archer's been experiencing for some time. Archer has a better idea. He wants to launch the ship earlier instead and use it to take the still-alive Klingon home. Seems like a reasonable suggestion to Admiral Forrest Kelly, and despite the complaints of Detective Sykes from Alien Nation, Archer is given his first mission. That means filling the gaps in his crew, so he takes the chance to nick Dr. Phlox, the guy currently tending the Klingon, while he's here. Our cast grows with the addition of Lieutenant Malcolm Reed and Ensign Travis Mayweather, who were in charge of guns and flying respectively, and neither of whom fancy the idea of using these new-fangled teleporting machines. It grows again when Archer goes to convince Ensign Hoshi Sato to be our linguistics expert, largely by dangling the prospect of meeting entirely new species as bait. And it grows further when Sub-Commander T'Pol becomes our science officer and suspected babysitter on behalf of the Vulcans. We're also introduced to Archer's dog Porthos at the same time, though we'll be using his full title of Porthos Dog in Space, as he's been adopted by Admiral Ross Slavin. With everybody ready, it's time to launch the ship, during which we're told that Archer's dad is one of the people who designed the new Warp 5 engines. Looks like nepotism has always been a thing at Starfleet. As a recorded speech from Zephram Cochrane himself plays, we all climb aboard the experimental ship Enterprise, and after a brief flashback showing the kid who's bad at painting models is none other than Archer himself, we bugger off towards Kronos. While they do that, a mystery lad is talking to another of the mottle-skinned aliens in a room with some distinctly weird blurring effects. The conversation's about our guest, and the mystery lad isn't best pleased when he learns the Klingon is still alive. He refuses to change the deaths of the other mottle-skinned aliens, heavily implying we're in time-fuckery territory, and is more concerned about some sort of evidence. The mottle-skinned alien promises to correct matters to maintain an agreement between them, which is clearly not good news for the ship we just launched. Phlox is settling into his sick bay, which largely involves filling it with assorted animals. This isn't the 24th century, you see, and that apparently means we need to smear space koala shit on illnesses. Hardly good news for our Klingon guest, but Phlox promises to do what he can. While he does that, Archer has dinner with T'Pol and Tucker. If the plan was to try and convince her we humans aren't as savage as we were a century ago when we nuked our own planet, then it's not entirely successful. As far as she's concerned, we're only a couple of steps above primates, and wouldn't be surprised if we rejoined them in the future. Maybe she feels that way because of things like Hoshi being a touch jumpy up on the bridge. This is the fastest humans have ever gone, and she's not enjoying the experience. Just as well, then, that Hoshi's given a distraction, as our Klingon is waking up and she's needed. She may as well have not bothered. It would appear our guest is completely off his tits, either as a result of the injury or being doped up with animal juices by Phlox, and is making no sense. All of which becomes irrelevant when we're given the rather more pressing matter of all the power turning off. That, in turn, is replaced by the even more pressing matter of being boarded. Some of the mottle-skinned aliens have made their way into sickbay and are proving difficult to see. Archer manages to poop red at one during the resulting Barney, but can't stop them kidnapping the Klingon. Clearly not an ideal result, which is why Archer wants to know why we didn't spot any incoming ships when he gets up to the bridge. Reed thinks the sensors recorded something before the power died, so Archer wants that analysed, and everything the Klingon said before he got kidnapped as well. This effort seems rather pointless to T'Pol. She argues the mission is over, albeit through no fault of Archer's, and dismisses his idea of tracking down whoever boarded us. That has Archer pulling her to one side and telling her to do her bloody job instead of looking for reasons to give up. He also brings his dad into it, apparently blaming Vulcan caution for him dying before he got a chance to see the Enterprise launch. Hardly the best way to convince T'Pol we're civilized now, but she gets on with her job anyway. Phlox has been busy while we were dicking about and sliced open our new corpse. The mottle-skinned aliens are called Suliban, a word the Klingon lad used, but this one's unlike any Phlox has seen before. Our corpse is very different to the norm, what with eyes that detect far more than the standard visible spectrum, and skin that changes colour to blend in. And it's not by accident either. Phlox thinks it's the result of some exceptionally skilled genetic tinkering. Archer visits engineering to find Tucker and T'Pol trying to track our mystery invader. She's still not being particularly helpful, but she's at least confirmed a stealth ship of some kind was detected before all the power went off. That would be very useful indeed if we had scanners that could track their engine wibblies, but we don't. Hoshi's translated everything the Klingon said and confirmed it's nearly all bollocks. The only part that tracks is the word Suliban, and 4 other words she couldn't translate, though suspects their names. T'Pol recognizes one of them, Riel, as a star system not far from us now. It's also the place our Klingon guest went before he did a Tom Paris landing on Earth, which is data T'Pol's Vulcan bosses didn't think should be shared with we humans. Archer's not impressed with that snippet, but at least it's a lead, so off we go. We might want to hurry. Our previous Klingon guest is currently being interrogated by the Suliban who was talking to Mystery Time Lad earlier, which I guess means he's in charge. Suliboss is getting no useful data from the Klingon despite the use of drugs, as he doesn't know what the Suliban are looking for. What he does share is that he went to the Rigel system to meet a Suliban woman called Sarin, and that's enough for Suliboss to decide to leave. We've arrived at the planet of Rigel 10. The trade complex there was visited by our former Klingon guest, so we're going down to ask around. While Travis and Reed are busy ticking the male gaze box of the Trek template, T'Pol and Tucker are instead being useful. They've discovered where Klingons like to hang out and arranged to meet Archer there. That's if Tucker can resist interfering with every alien he meets. Anyway, he mistakes a mother weaning her child for abuse and nearly wades in before T'Pol stops him and explains his ignorance. Archer and Hoshi have made it to the rumoured Klingon hangout, though it's less populated than expected. That changes when they're jumped by Suliban and dragged away. Hoshi's locked up and discovers T'Pol and Tucker are already imprisoned. Archer, on the other hand, is taken to meet someone who wants to know why we're looking for a certain Klingon and introduces herself as Saren. Archer's not very forthcoming, partly because of the whole being captured by Suliban thing. Saren's answer is to mash faces with him and have her skin change, as she's actually another Suliban. Mashing faces is a way of measuring trust, apparently, and she's now of the opinion that Archer is a totally stand-up guy. So trustworthy, in fact, that we get a lore dump about her being a former member of something called the Cabal. This Cabal seeks to advance the species through whatever tinkering it can, and she thinks it's gone too far. In fact, the Cabal have been trying to trigger a Klingon civil war, evidence of which was being carried by the guest we were transporting before he got kidnapped. As to why the Cabal would want a civil war, they technically don't. They're just doing what they've been told by their masters in the far future, because this whole thing is part of a time-fuckery war. Anywho, Saren wants to stop this, so she's going to help us find the Klingon courier. Or not, as this is when we get attacked by some other Suliban. Saren frees T'Pol, Tucker and Hoshi before trying to scarp her, only for her to get shot in the back by Sulibos himself. She tells us to find the Klingon, then carks it, so we bugger off without her. Finding the shuttle's a bit of a bugger in this weather, so it's lucky Reed and Travis decided to give up on their own search and go back to it. Archer's call to them is interrupted by both interference and the start of another firefight. Not to worry, as it turns out they were right next to each other all along. T'Pol's the first to notice, but is knocked over by the downdraft of another ship taking off. Archer goes over to cover her while Tucker and Hoshi leg it. T'Pol gets away, though Archer takes some poop to the leg in the process. He's dragged on board, and we all scarper back to the Enterprise, which will now be under the command of T'Pol, as Archer is too busy being unconscious and having flashbacks of flying his model as a kid. His piloting is as good as his painting, which is why he ends up planting it in the sand like a complete schmuck. We're back on the Enterprise, but T'Pol and Tucker have a problem. Phlox's scans show they were exposed to a virus, which means a turn in the Berman chamber, stripped down to their undercrackers and smearing each other with goo. Definitely necessary and not at all gratuitous. It gives Tucker a chance to be pissed off at T'Pol, though. He assumes the first thing she'll do as captain is head back to Earth, and she all but confirms as much. That makes him rant about how it's unfair to Archer, just like the Vulcans were unfair to his dad as well. Not letting the Archer family see the conclusion of their work is a theme, he suggests. They're out of the Berman chamber when Archer wakes up, which isn't surprising given that it's now several hours later. Archer assumes T'Pol has turned the ship around and is surprised to learn this is not the case. Instead, she and Tucker fiddled with the sensors so they can track Suliban ships and headed after the lads who attacked us. Tucker's speech had the desired effect, it seems, though she still believes the whole thing is completely daft. This leaves Archer confused, something he grapples with while recording a personal log. A Vulcan essentially doing him a solid is something that simply doesn't compute, and he's wondering if he should share what Saren told him about the time-fuckery war. The decision will have to wait as he's called to the bridge. We followed the Suliban engine wibblies to a gas giant, but lost their trail in the process. The reason we discover is because this area has seen at least 14 ships recently, which rather suggests our gas giant contains more than simply gas. This discovery is bad news for Sulibos, who's having to explain to Mystery Timelad that he was followed. Not a great result, but Mystery Timelad is more concerned about the possibility that we have the message from the Klingon courier. Either way, kabooming the Enterprise will solve the problem. Perhaps the problem will solve itself, as our jaunt into the gas giant isn't a particularly comfortable one. It becomes even less comfortable when some ships start pooping at us just after we spot a structure of some sort. At least we managed to get some decent scans before we're forced to withdraw and hide in a higher gas layer. The structure in question is actually hundreds of ships stuck together with magnets, and of the several thousand life signs inside, there's one that isn't Suliban. Archer's willing to bet it's our Klingon, which raises a problem. Using the fancy new teleporter machine to get him back isn't advisable, as it's not been tested on people yet. Instead, we pop back down and snag ourselves one of the Suliban ships using the Enterprise's grappling hook. This is the low-tech future after all, so we don't have tractor beams yet. The pilot bails out, which is pretty ballsy under the circumstances, and we reel in our new ship. The plan, it seems, is to fly over to the installation in the ship we just nicked, which rather relies on nobody having noticed we nicked it or asking why it was missing for a while, but let's ignore that for now. Archer's learned precisely sod all from getting shot on the last away mission, so he and Tucker will be going over to find and re-kidnap the Klingon, which also rather relies on the unidentified signal being him, but let's ignore that too. As plans go, it could be generously described as complete and utter bollocks, and that's before you consider the several thousand Suliban over there. This is Starfleet though, so we're doing it anyway. Over they go with guns and an anti-magnet gizmo while the Enterprise dodges depth charges, or height charges I guess, as they're being fired upwards. Archer and Tucker dock without incident. Well, mostly. They're spotted, but a bit of pooping red fixes it, and further into the structure they go. While they do, the Enterprise is getting the absolute shit knocked out of it by those height charges, so decides it's time to move. That means Archer and Tucker won't be able to find them, but the alternative is getting kaboomed. The away team's having a bit more luck at least. They found the mystery signal, and it's our former Klingon guest. He's not terribly friendly to begin with, but eventually figures out we're his best bet for scarpering. Our escape proves slightly more troublesome though, and we end up in a barney. Some pooping from us and strangling from the Klingon clears the way, and Archer sends them ahead while he rigs the anti-magnet gizmo. The individual ships of the installation are magnetically locked, you see, so this will give them a very bad day indeed. A slight problem, Archer wasn't paying attention when Reed told him it only had a 5-second timer. Rather than legging it, he hangs about to watch it work and is subsequently trapped when the ship he came in separates along with loads of others. Frankly, he's lucky the whole thing didn't result in explosive decompression, but I guess the Suliban care more about safety than we do, so force fields pop up. Tucker calls him to ask what the bloody hell's going on and is ordered back to the Enterprise by Archer, which is a problem as the Enterprise has buggered off to avoid those height charges. Not to worry though, as Hoshi's been listening out for them. Sounds like noise to everybody else, but she's sure it's Tucker, so back they go for him. While he's getting picked up, Archer's exploring. He's somehow managed to find his way to the weird blurry room that Suliban was talking to Mystery Time Guy in. Back on the Enterprise, Tucker's arguing we should go rescue Archer. He and T'Pol go at it for a while before Tucker mentions Archer saving her life and swings things his way. To Archer once more, who's now joined by Suliban, albeit in hiding. He advises against shooting in here and addresses Archer by name. He knows quite a few things, in fact, chief among them that Archer's not currently a threat, so he can just leave if he wants to. Archer pisses on that by sharing that he's aware of Suliban interfering with the Klingons and the whole time-fuckery war thing. Archer's reward is to get knocked on his ass by Suliban and lose his gun. Suliban decides Archer should die after all, and ignoring his own advice about weapons, poops some red at him. The timey-wimey room makes it act oddly, so Archer is able to dodge the beam and Suliban is knocked on his ass by feedback. Archer takes cover while Suliban grabs the gun again, which feels a bit pointless after what just happened, but whatever. Some more banter ends with Archer distracting Suliban into firing at another wall while he legs it for the door. Suliban chases after him into the photosensitive seizure room, and we have a bit of a wrestle. Meanwhile, the Enterprise is flying towards what's left of the installation. Some of the detached pods are now up and running, which is a problem as they're also pooping yellow at us. Docking would be unwise under the circumstances, so T'Pol decides to use the slightly less dangerous option. Archer manages to free himself from Suliban and tries to scarp her. As Suliban is about to shoot him with his own gun, Archer disappears. He reappears on the Enterprise, which means the first test of our new teleporter machine on a humanoid has been successful, and we bugger off as fast as we can. We've arrived at Kronos with our passenger. He's greeted with a knife, but it's only to cut his hand. The message was being carried in his blood, you see, which is why the lad didn't have any idea what Suliban wanted. He wasn't let in on the secret. Archer and company aren't killed afterwards, which is as close as your average Klingon comes to showing their appreciation, so we can chalk this one up as a success. Admiral Forrest Kelly seems to agree. Archer updated him on things, and the official response we've just received is that we should carry on exploring. The Vulcans are sending a transport for T'Pol now we're not going back to Earth, but Archer has another idea. He's been thinking about things and concluded that maybe his attitude to Vulcans might not be 100% accurate based on her actions to date. That's why he wants her to stay. Of course, he doesn't want to tell the Vulcans that himself, as it might sound like he needs nannying, so if she's agreeable, maybe she could make the request herself. Perhaps seeing this is the closest to a thank you she's going to get, she concurs. Up on the bridge, we point our ship in the direction of the nearest inhabited planet, so we'll leave Archer to reminisce about finally managing to fly his badly painted model when he was a kid, as we prepare to take our next step on the long road. A new beginning for Star Trek then, or perhaps more accurately, an old one. We're back before the days of Jimmy, Kirk and company, back before even the birth of the Federation, and looking at a period of Earth's history about which we know very little. We get all of the standard series premiere guff, of course, a new crew we're briefly introduced to, but without the time to really focus on them that much, a new ship, or station in the case of DS9, to explore and learn the quirks, the seeds of plot elements that can be expanded further over the course of the series. The adventure itself is perfectly fine. It's about as Star Trek as it gets, which is to say we have a mission to do and it goes completely tits up in unexpected ways before we pull it back. I made a crack about the plan to infiltrate the Suliban modular complex being completely ill-judged, but all that does is prove Starfleet's attitude to self-preservation goes all the way back to its earliest missions. Maybe the Starfleet propensity for captain-led-away missions is a long-standing homage to Archer himself, subsequent command officers believing that reckless abandon is a requirement for success instead of an impediment to it. If so, Archer's got a lot of shit to answer for. Elsewhere, we lay the groundwork for a potential new big bad in the Suliban. We'll give some points here, as, to be fair, this is actually quite well considered. Rehashing any of the old enemies established in the original series removes any real impact, as we know how that all turns out. Similarly, a completely unknown species has no genuine threat, because we're aware there's no mention of them in shows set later chronologically. Taking an unknown group and tying them to a temporal Cold War is a neat solution to the problem, and I say that as someone with a well-recorded general dislike of time-fuckery in Trek. This approach has some added bonuses too. Reducing Sulibos and the Cabal to underlings of something greater gives us a big bad behind the big bad in the form of Mystery Time Guy. It also sets up a situation where some Suliban consider the cost of this deal far too high. Trek, and sci-fi on the whole, has a regular problem with painting a whole species as bad and takes several stories to establish it's not quite that simple. Enterprise, on the other hand, gets its nuance in on the ground floor. Compliments usually come before scorn in these analyses though, so let's deal with the clangers. The most obvious and most widely mocked is the Berman goo chamber. Now, I don't know for certain that it was Rick Berman specifically who decided we should have close-ups of rubbing slime into the bare skin of people in their undercrackers. The script was co-written by Brannon Braga, and there's every chance somebody else along the way suggested it. But Berman's the guy who ultimately signed off on things, so he's where the buck stops. The whole scene is a complete mismatch of tone and content, its intended purpose of titillation being entirely obvious. The other sore thumb for me was Archer's behaviour towards T'Pol when we meet her. Volatile? You have no idea how much I'm restraining myself from knocking you on your ass. Slice that however you want, put on whatever filter of species you want, but it still boils down to Archer either threatening or expressly implying the option of violence against a woman. For the lead character of the show, for the captain we're supposed to grow to like and respect over the course of the series, this is an absolutely bizarre choice. That anybody could put this to paper and think it was beneficial to the character or the story is utterly beyond me. On the whole, then, the premiere is a mostly solid start with some pretty good ideas, brought down a couple of rungs by some bafflingly wrong-headed and entirely unnecessary additions. In many ways, you could argue that makes it just as Star Trek as anything which came before it. Before we go, though, let's try to step back from the story and end with a look at what other things we learn. First, and perhaps most importantly, is that humanity's exploration of the stars was far from welcomed by our galactic neighbour. The Vulcans have been urging caution for a century by this point, with the result being many members of our own species adopting the opinion that they're deliberately holding us back. Whether that assessment is accurate, or even fair to make in the first place given the inherent societal differences, is another matter entirely. Regardless of how warranted that opinion is, pitching the Vulcans as a sort of mild antagonist is an interesting choice. We viewers have known them predominantly as staunch allies in other old Treks, at least for the most part, so seeing how that came into being gives us a glimpse at post-World War III humanity and Vulcan attitudes towards it, along with the struggles of early Starfleet as a result. Speaking of which, I think this is the first mention that Starfleet predates the Federation. That's not particularly surprising when you'd need to meet alien species before you can make a coalition with them. Still, this is our first indicator that Starfleet was the organization responsible for it, and then became part of the group it was instrumental in creating. Lastly, we get a little nod to what could be the beginnings of the Prime Directive. Tucker's willingness to interfere in a situation of which he has no real understanding suggests it's not an aspect of exploring we humans had given much thought to by this point. Conversely, T'Pol's intervention and explanation implies this is something the Vulcans have given significant consideration, and might also explain their cautious attitude towards us if they're treating humans with the same rules. And that gives us a few things to think about. If the Vulcans, or their influence at least, were the original source of the idea that would become General Order 1 and then the Prime Directive, might that possibly explain why the human captains we've looked at have so regularly been shit at following it? I'd be interested to see how often a Vulcan captain violates the rule, and more interested still to see what effect that might have on the success rate for their missions. End of episode.
Hello. If you're new here, you're probably wondering what a pair of cartoon dogs are doing on Bridge of the Enterprise.
And if you're not new here, you're probably wondering how we got here as well. Last time you saw us, we were in the real world.
Fair point. I guess this is the recap video then.
Sure, let's ease them back into it.
Right then, I'm Space Dog. I'm the one that got Tom Paris off a murder charge, but for merchandising reasons, I'm also a legally distinct entity with no official connection to any Star Trek intellectual property.
And I'm Computer, or used to be at least. I'm now technically Computer stuck in a cartoon dog without a face after a teleporter accident, but Computer takes less time to say. I was the main computer core of the Starship Voyager, but, for merchandising reasons, am also a legally distinct entity with no official connection to any Star Trek intellectual property.
Through a series of events that can only be described as shenanigans, we ended up nicking Delta Flyer,
which may have actually been the TARDIS from Doctor Who,
and scarper into Deep Space Nine. Copyright Paramount Skydance Corporation, all rights reserved, no official connection is stated or implied.
Through another series of events that can only be described as shenanigans, we ended up inside the internet and then the real world. Unbeknownst to us, the whole thing was a tie-in for this YouTube channel launching a merch store.
Bastard.
So we decided to just climb back inside the PC of the guy who makes these, because that's a thing we were told we can do by the algorithm that powers search engines.
Look at me, I've got a cameo in this one. All of which leaves us back in the editing software for these things, because, honestly, what else were we gonna do?
Wow. That was both far shorter and a lot less coherent than I expected it to be. Woof.